You have Joseph Smith and Brigham Young both saying that gods could fall. So how does that affect the problem of evil? Well, what you've got to do then is look at the world empirically and say, let's say that a God exists exactly the way LDS theology says. Very powerful, but not omnipotent. Very knowledgeable, but not omniscient. Supposed to be wholly good, but not necessarily good in the metaphysical sense that he could not be anything else. And that the fundamental characteristic that he has, like all of us, is free agency. Now you look at the problem of evil and you have to say, does this look like a world in which God is on his throne ruling with goodness, justice, etc., stopping all the evil that he could stop, given the immense power that he does possess? Or does this look like a world in which God has fallen from his throne, and that what we're experiencing is a world that has been cast down, as Smith and Young said could happen? And I said, well, on the Mormon view, well, your solution to the traditional problem of evil is nice and tidy. It creates a very different empirical problem of evil in which you have to go and look. And, for certain evils, you might be able to say, the analogy I give is it's like the man who comes home from work and he's got some lipstick on his collar. And he says to his wife, it was Sherry's birthday and we had a cake for her and she gave me a hug and she rubbed up on my collar. And, your wife may very well find that plausible and believable, and it very well may be true, right? Yeah, there's nothing going on. But if you keep coming home with lipstick on your collar or on your neck, right, at a certain point, the explanations that you may give, which have plausibility and rationality to them, begin to look very suspect. And the proper conclusion you should draw is, this guy's having an affair, right? And I think something like that ends up being the case for the LDS view, that if you have a God of the metaphysical qualities that traditional Mormonism ascribes within an uncreated universe, then you have to be open to the possibility that this is a fallen world and God is not any longer wholly good.
It's interesting. Stephen Law has posited this counter
evil God,
the malevolent God objection, or what he calls, and he says, "What if God is wholly malevolent?" And and he says all of the Christian exceptions apply in reverse. He basically takes the free will defense and he flips it on its head and says, it's people do bad things more than they do good things. There are people who do good as an exception. God allows that because as a malevolent God, he understands that a little bit of goodness to then be crushed actually accentuates the evil, right? And he teases out this entire concept. Now, Law's objection fails because it's impossible for there to be anything like a wholly malevolent being. It's philosophically deniable. You can't have a whole malevolence. There's no such thing as pure evil. But it's interesting in this view that then applies. Law's objection apply, and that concept is even a live concept if you think about it. It could be that God is malevolent.
I think you related it to Descartes' evil demon.
Sure.
In the paper.
How would you know the difference, right? And Law isn't the only one to posit something like that. A generation ago, John Roth, in the book that Steve Davis edited on 4 Views of the Problem of Evil, from a Jewish perspective, said, well, I think that we ought to conclude God is not wholly good. So of course, that's just denying the other premise of the traditional problem of evil.
Well, and you had the famous book by Kushner, right, that argued that it got, why do good people suffer or whatever, and it was to that rejected the premise of omnipotence.
Mm.
And there, I don't know. I mean, I don't know much about process theologies, but there may be something there about God becoming something, and he's not quite there yet. Maybe God is still in his process of
Yeah.
exaltation, and therefore we have
Well,
to
the
suffer
Latter-day Saints,
along with him. But yeah,
Latter-day Saint philosophers have often highlighted similarities with process thought. And
yeah,
they look at process theologians as being kind of natural allies within the philosophical landscape,
right,
because
right.
both deny creation ex nihilo, both have a view of God's becoming.
I mean,
But on the LDS view, they would say, well, we have an advantage over process thought in that we think God can do more than the process theologian thinks, right? On process theology, you get all of these attempts at influence, and it's all very subtle, and you get these lures that God puts out there to try to persuade people to do things. The Mormon is going to say, well, God can do more than that. But of course, the more you say
yeah.
God can do, then the more you have the issue of, well, then why didn't he do X, Y, and Z? Or
And
why
then
didn't he stop Genghis Khan or
Well,
Napoleon or Hitler?
and then the principle that if the idea is that one of the eternal principles is something like a principle of malevolence or evil, right? It's sort of a dualism,
The
right?
opposition in all things.
Heraclitus's, conflict is the mother of all things or father of all things, right? And so, I mean, this is something in the Stoic thought. It's never fully worked out. You got the monistic ontology, but where do these dueling principles of virtue and vice?
right,
How do they fit in there?
because
And
you get the Euthyphro dilemma writ large here. Now it's like God is subject to the good and the evil, right? I mean, is it good because God claims it to be good, or is it already good and that God is beholden to it? And then again, in there you say, well, if he's beholden to
it
something, he
falls
can't be
on the
God.
one side of the dilemma, which is
Sure.
God is beholden to the principles. The
Yes.
principle of piety, or
Yes.
in this case, not just the principle of piety, but the principle of vice, or whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
which is then, I guess, never really overcome.